All right, welcome to those who are here in person, and maybe some people will show up on Zoom, and this is also going to be recorded and available to a wider audience in the future, so countywide we'll have a vast audience for this informative seminar. Here's my wife showing up. I'm very glad to see Beth. Good, good. Let's see, so I'm Stuart Sessions, a member of the Town of Chevy Chase Climate and Environment Committee. Dan Clossy, sitting in the third row there, is the chairman of the committee. And the committee, as well as other, in collaboration occasionally with other committees in Chevy Chase, have been, in the town of Chevy Chase, have been presenting a series of Green Town presentations. And we did one at one point when the town was considering adopting the county's program, the county's pesticide program, which essentially bans the use of chemical pesticides for cosmetic purposes on lawns. And Mary Travaglini helped us very much with the town's effort to come on board with the county's program. As have all the other municipalities in the independent jurisdictions in Montgomery County. I guess Mary will talk about organic lawn care and how to do it, why you want to do it in a couple of minutes. I will, after Mary finishes, talk a little bit about a subject which is kind of an offshoot on the organic lawn care issue, which is managing the right-of-way strips next to the streets in town, which is an interesting, you can call them lawns, and it's a sort of a further issue that's near and dear to my heart. Mary Travaglini has been with Montgomery County for maybe 10 years total. 5 years, almost 5 years, she's been the manager of the Organic Lawn and Landscape Program, which is implementing and following up on getting compliance with educating people about the county's pesticide program, which is quite innovative relative to what other jurisdictions have done, and Montgomery County deserves great credit for having adopted that set of programs. Mary also is trained as a landscape architect, and she previously worked for the county in the water area, dealing with rainscapes and issues like that, so she has quite a bit of experience around the county and knows sort of a variety of issues in addition to specifically pesticides and lawn care. Let me turn it over to Mary to start.
Thank you, Stuart.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for coming out tonight. I really appreciate you being here. And I threw some extra slides in tonight that I don't normally share. Most of my information that I share is about organic lawn care. So I'll talk about soils and soil biology and how to care for lawns organically. But Stuart and his team also asked, can you throw in a few tidbits about getting rid of lawns, right? And that's something that we don't do enough of, in terms of education, both in the county, the state, et cetera, but it's a topic that is near and dear to a lot of people's hearts because lawns themselves don't have a lot of environmental benefits. So I'm going to talk tonight a little bit about organic lawn care topics and then also a little bit about the Rainscapes program that the county offers and ways that you can get resources available if you are interested in getting rid of your lawns or also getting rid of impervious surfaces, mitigating stormwater, et cetera. As Stuart mentioned, the town of Chevy Chase leads the way a lot of times. Hey, if the county's not going to do it, we're going to do it, which is great. It just means a lot of you are really, knowledgeable and also know that it can be done, and it can be done in a suburban, urban environment where you can actually have restrictions on traditional practices and still actually have beautiful yards and beautiful lawns and beautiful environments. So one thing that's really important that we spend a lot of time on is the county's new pesticide law. The pesticide law currently applies everywhere in the county except for the town of Laytonsville and the town of Poolsville, because individual municipalities, if they had not already adopted that part of our code, they had to come in and adopt it if they wanted to. Those are the only two that have not adopted it to date, but otherwise it applies, and it applies to everyone, everywhere. Applies to contractors and homeowners alike. There's no difference in terms of who's taking care of the lawn. What this law did is it essentially banned the use of synthetic pesticides for the use for most cosmetic treatments on lawns, playgrounds, and mulch recreation areas. It applies to weeds, bugs, fungi, you name it. And what you can do is apply USDA certified organic products. So if it's allowed in organic agriculture, it's allowed in organic lawn care. But if it's a synthetic that's not under USDA jurisdiction, then for organics, then it cannot be used. There are some exemptions, things like biting and stinging insects. There's a couple specific invasive species that it's allowed on. And what we educate people on is to look for labels that then come to us if the labels aren't clear. But what you can start with is looking for these labels that you see along the bottom here. And the first one says OMRI. This is the Organic Materials Research Institute. It will say OMRI listed for organic use. The middle one is an EPA label that looks a little bit like our giant grocery store logo with the leaves, and it'll say for organic gardening. It might be in black and white. Both of those labels are optional labels. The manufacturers do not have to put them on the product, but there's no reason for them not to put them on the product if they have the space to do so. For me, the only products that I've seen that don't use the labels are in really tiny containers, and they just don't have space to put it on there. But those are optional. You want to look for those. It's really easy. The other is the last one, and this one is a little harder to explain, but if you go home tonight and you pick up a bottle of bleach, a bottle of Lysol, anything like that, you're going to see these a box with EPA numbers. It's going to have the EPA registration number. It's going to say caution or danger or warning on it. Those are required EPA labels for most chemical products. If they are exempt from EPA labeling, they won't have any of those numbers on them. There's no EPA number required, and usually within the label, it will say something along the lines of this is exempt under FIFRA 25B, which is the federal regulation for laws, but it usually will say exempt under FIFRA 25B, but usually what you're looking for is no EPA number, it's good to go. Those are typically like your cinnamons, clove, soybean oil, garlic oil, things like that. They're typically things that you can also ingest, so they consider them low-risk pesticides and don't require labels. So the things you're gonna look for, sometimes there might not be a label on them, and our website explains it in high detail. We usually try to update a list and go through and sift through all the things that are registered in the state so that you can find that list on our website and actually look in more detail. But what's key to know about this is that none of the weed and feeds, if you're familiar with those, they're fertilizers and pesticides in a bag together, none of those are organic. All of them have a synthetic pesticide in them. So we just tell people no weed and feeds are allowed. But then I don't want to dwell on the law and what we can't do. It's more about what we can do, and we can focus on making our lawns more organic. And the reason why it really matters to focus on organic lawns is that we have a lot of lawn in the county. We spend a lot of time in the county on stormwater mitigation, runoff from impervious surfaces, our roofs, our roadways, all those sorts of things. But only 14% of the county is covered by impervious surface. Twice as much of it is covered by turf grass. So we have a huge landscape area that could be healthier, that could be good for our environment, that could soak up water like a sponge, that could reduce the use of chemicals and things like that. So we want to make sure that our lawns are doing the best they can. They're the least valuable for the environment in terms of wildlife and pollinators and things of that nature, but they are going to exist, and they're never going to be gone forever. They're going to be in our right-of-ways for safety, they're going to be in our playgrounds, they're going to be on our soccer fields, they're going to be in our yards. So we want to really focus on, with that turf grass, let's make the soil healthy, make it alive, make it a sponge, make it soak up stormwater, and so on. So what I'm going to do first is just go through the tips, my top 10 tips of how to care for a lawn organically. I'm then going to go through some of the organic amendments that people use to make their lawns healthy. And then I'm gonna switch over to some slides on if you wanna get rid of your lawn, here's, some examples that it can be done and some programs that are available to you. So I'm gonna go through these one by one. Again, there's a lot of tips. Our website is extremely well built and has a lot more information than I can give you tonight. So I definitely encourage you to go and dive in there. The very first one is to stop using chemicals, synthetic chemicals in particular. This is not just pesticides, but also fertilizers. One thing about synthetic fertilizers is that they feed the plant immediately. It's like taking a vitamin, right? So, you might take a vitamin, but it doesn't mean your body is ready for the vitamin. You don't know if you're gonna absorb that vitamin or how much vitamin you're gonna absorb. And that's what fertilizers do with plants. They have to be ready to take them up. If they're not ready to take them up, they're gonna wash out, and then our Chesapeake Bay is, polluted because of that. So what happens is if they can't absorb them right then, they wash out. It's just like taking a vitamin. A little while later, you go to pee and it's bright yellow. That's all the vitamins that your body could not absorb, right? And that's exactly what happens with fertilizers. They wash out into the waterway because the plant can't absorb them. So we want to focus on plants and soil. We want to focus on soil, feeding the soil, not the plants, because the plants will take it from the soil when the bacteria and protozoa and all those other things are ready to feed it to them, and they're ready to take it up. There's a whole balance going on underground. There's also a very high embodied energy. It takes a lot of fossil fuels to make fertilizers. So they're taking them, and in a lab, they have to convert them in the factory lab to convert them to the form that a plant can take up. And that takes a lot of fossil fuels, and then we also have to transport them to get them to us. The other thing is when we feed these to the plant, they also force the plant sometimes to grow artificially, and they grow weak, they have weak growth, and that's very attractive to pests. So by fertilizing the plant, you get this flush of great, growth of grass when you just really were so excited to have your lawn be green, but it's just a buffet for pests to come in. There's also a lot of indication that they harm humans, wildlife, pollinators, and pets. So let's just kind of get them out there and let's focus on the soil. Let's make the soil healthy so that our grass and other plants can grow really well. And then it comes down to one of the biggest things that people have to do is learning to tolerate some quote unquote weeds. Change your expectation of what a lawn is. I have to remind people, a lawn is not a ball field. A lawn is not a golf course. A lawn is not Versailles. A lawn is supposed to have a mixture of plants in it. That's what a lawn actually is. And we've gotten so obsessed with this idea that we're bad people if our lawns are not just grass. But for me, the goal is I want you to not have bare ground at any time of year. Bare ground in a lawn means that you are just exposing soil to erosion, to solar radiation, etc. The goal is, as long as you have weeds mixed in there, no problem. If you have so many weeds that when they die in the winter or the summer, you've got bare ground, let's get a little more focus on getting you more lawn. But a lawn should have a mixture of plants in it, and we need to slowly start getting back to understanding of that. And I believe we'll get there, but it's gonna take a while for people to adjust to that. We also reduce the impact from pesticides and fertilizers. We provide some diversity in a lawn for pollinators. That's maybe the best we can do. With that, there are species like clover that actually benefit the soil for the grass, and many of these are actually edible to humans and wildlife. So those weeds in there, a lot of people will say, well, that's a European weed, it's not native. Well, neither is the grass. So if we're gonna have this lawn, it's okay, let's just have a mixture of things in there. A key thing is about mowing. So for those of you that mow your own lawn or have a company mow your lawn, one of the key things is to make sure that those blades are sharpened about every 12 hours of use. So a lot of lawn mowing companies, if they're doing it every day, they're sharpening their blades at the end of every day or every other day. Because especially if that lawn has, rocks and sticks and pine cones in there, it's gonna nick them. But when you see a grass blade that's cut really sharp, that grass blade's gonna heal really fast. Those cells are gonna close off. When you have a frayed edge like this, you have all this surface area. And all that surface area means you're losing more water through all those broken cells. It's spending more energy healing all of those broken cells. And also it's attracting more pests because you have more surface area of damaged plant to attract pests to. So we want to have a nice clean cut so that it heals fast, doesn't lose water, and also that will keep the ground cool. We also want to keep our lawns high, ideally over 3 to 4 inches at all times. There are some instances where you might cut low because you're doing an overseeding, but you want to set your mower to the highest possible setting. The reason for that is, there's so many reasons for that. One is it keeps the ground cool. So one of the reasons golf courses are watering their grass every day is because they cut so short. There's solar radiation reaching the ground. It's drying the ground, heating the ground. It loses more water, so it dries out. So the taller the grass is, the cooler the ground is. The taller the grass is, the deeper the roots are because it's getting more photosynthesis because it has more green above ground, right? And the more it's going to shade out weeds. So there's a million reasons why to keep your lawn as tall as possible. You're still going to cut it on the same frequency, right? But it's going to be taller. So that's really important. Leaving all your grass clippings is behind is really important. It's a huge nutrient for lawns, and they'll disappear fast. The only reason you ever really want to take these off is sometimes you might have a weed infestation that's in seed, and you want to get rid of those seeds. So sometimes there's a reason to take those grass blades off. If you have a wedding the next day, a garden party, and you wanted to make sure that everybody's feet aren't getting grass clippings stuck. If you really hate grass clippings, get a mulching mower, or if you can, convert to a mulching mower kit on your lawnmower. What that does is it chops it up in multiple pieces because it's multiple blades going around into little pieces, and it breaks down faster. So you always want to leave that there. It's also food for the soil. So very important. It frustrates me to no end to see people putting all this effort into removing one of the most important things from their lawn nutrient-wise, which is the grass clippings, because it gives you 50 to 100% of the nitrogen that a lawn needs right back to it. The other is taking a soil sample. So if you haven't done this, they're like $8 to $15. They're not very expensive. You can go to our website, find out all the places you can take a soil sample. This will measure if you have nutrient imbalances in your soil. It will measure how much organic content you have in your soil. It will make sure that you're following phosphorus laws because the state has laws around the application of fertilizers and compost. And then you can also even diagnose some pest problems through taking soil samples. If you have different areas of your lawn, let's say you have a sunny slope and a shady flat area, you want to do a soil sample for each of those spots because they're different. The soil is going to be different. And then what you can do is you take that soil sample, first go to our website, there's a lot of information on reading it, but there's a couple of things that are important on soil samples in Maryland. One is the phosphorus. So if you look at this second line here where you can see those stars, the phosphorus, which is the P value, you can see the star that it's up in the medium range. If it's in the low range, we can apply compost or fertilizer. Once we're up into the medium, once we're in the high to optimum range, we can't apply anything that has phosphorus in the state of Maryland unless you're establishing a brand new lawn. So that's important to look at. The other is if you look at that box at the bottom I highlighted in yellow, that's the organic matter. And ideally we want to be approaching 5% or more of organic matter to have a really healthy lawn. And that's true of a lot of soils. So while we have a lot of clay in our soil and it's very important, we also need organic matter to be in there. So looking at that and looking at your organic matter, this number alone can be increased just by leaving your grass clippings on the lawn because that's organic matter that you're leaving behind. The other thing you want to look at is the balance of the calcium to magnesium ratio. Around here we have a lot of people with compacted soils. You'll know that if you have a compacted soil, if you stick a screwdriver in, even right now, and it's hard to push into the ground. But the calcium to magnesium balance is one of those important things. And again, go back to our website. I'm not expecting you to remember this, but you want to have 5 to 8 parts calcium to 1 part magnesium in your soil. And that means your calcium should show up as 60 to 85%, and your magnesium to be 10 to 13%. Sorry, the little zoom thing is over that. Together, you want that to be less than 80% of what's considered the cation exchange capacity. And I have a much longer presentation that you can watch on our YouTube channel that I explain all the soil science, etc. But you can see on this sample, the calcium is the first yellow line, and that says 65, and the magnesium says 20, and that's way off. So the calcium's in the range, right, at 65. The magnesium is way over 10 to 13%. It's at 20, and combined, it's 85% of that total. So right there, I know right there alone, I've got an imbalance, and I knew that this soil was compacted, but it's compacted because these salts are off. So there's a lot of things about the soil sample that will tell you why your soil isn't healthy and what you might be able to do about it. And we'll talk about some of the amendments you might use for your soil. I mentioned compacted soil. So again, if you go home tonight or tomorrow, you stick a screwdriver in your soil, it's hard to get in. Pretty good sign that it's compacted. So what a lot of people do is core aerate their soils. It pulls out these little plugs like you see in the image here. They look like little grass poop plugs, and you go several times across the lawn. Usually going to use a professional for this because the machine is very heavy. Even if you can get it off the truck yourself, then it's a lot of work to push it, right? So usually it's professional. Sometimes people go in with their neighbors. Hey, I'm gonna get my lawn aerated. Maybe we all go in together and maybe they'll give us a good price to aerate it. A lot of times it's usually done in conjunction with overseeding and adding compost. But what that does is it opens up these cores in the soil. It allows microorganisms to get some air, which they need. It allows compost and seed to mix into that and provides for water to get into the soil profile. These will disappear from your lawn in a couple days. And that's just bacteria, just like lawn clippings go away. The bacteria just have a field day because they've got air, they've got water, and they start to break them down really quickly. The other thing is overseeding the lawn. Who here has a lawn? And then keep your hand up if you've overseeded in the past year. Oh, I got a couple. Okay, good. So you want to be overseeding on a regular basis, typically annually, sometimes more than annually, because grass only lives on average about 7 years per plant. So the grass is dying off, right? It doesn't live forever. It doesn't live as long as a tree, but there's a lot of it. So we don't notice that until the lawn starts getting thin. But grass should have about 7,000 blades of grass in 1 square feet. So imagine a big dinner plate or one of those cookie plates over there. A really dense lawn can have 7,000 blades in that cookie plate. That's a lot of grass. That's the kind of grass that fights weeds, all right? So grass is way more aggressive than any weed that we have in our environment. So a dense grass is going to keep out weeds. It's going to prevent weed seeds from reaching the ground. It's going to prevent weed seeds from having access to soil, sunlight, water, air, etc. The best time to overseed is in the fall. If you missed fall, the second best time is actually winter. It's called a dormant winter overseeding. Third best time is now. If you haven't overseeded, you need to do it now. Worst time of year is the summer, but do it. If you need to do some spot seeding, it's just going to take more water and more effort for that grass to survive because it's going to be really stressed in our summer environment. Just constantly overseeding, annual overseeding is really important. We also need to feed the soil. So again, I mentioned fertilizers feed the plant, but we need to feed the soil, and soil eats carbon. So getting carbon-based materials back out there, whether it's chopped up leaves, whether it's adding compost, is really important. The carbon will buffer the pH in your soil to keep it more stable. It's going to increase our cation exchange for nutrients to be able to not be washed out to the Chesapeake Bay. Supplies a lot of micronutrients, fights diseases, etc. If you have a high level of phosphorus, you won't be able to add compost. And if you have a really big lawn, it's very labor intensive to do like what you see here where they're adding a layer of compost. So what I recommend, if you haven't heard of it, you can make your own compost tea. We have a recipe for it on our website. It's cheap, it has no phosphorus in it. You make it in a bucket at home, you dilute it and put it out on your lawn. It's actually kind of fun to imagine what's happening in that bucket because you're basically brewing microorganisms. You're creating billions more microorganisms than you started with, and then you can get them on the soil because it's microorganisms that are doing everything. Nothing would be green on this planet if it wasn't for microorganisms in the soil. Another is to limit watering. So you only really want to water a lawn around here during establishment or extreme drought. When you do water, you want to have at least an inch of water or more go into the ground. So if you're just doing shallow watering, or if you have a sprinkler system, that shallow watering is only watering weeds. It's encouraging weeds and it's not helping your grass at all. So grass typically has what's called like a bit of a thatch layer in that upper layer right above the soil, and then the roots go deep to get their water. Whereas a lot of the weeds that are in our lawns have very shallow roots, and they're just going to take up all that water and nothing's going to go to the lawn. You want to encourage those lawn roots to be deep, and you want to get the water deep. The only way to do that is to do an inch or more at a time. The way to know that you've watered an inch or more is just put out a bowl, and while you're watering or while your sprinkler's running, when that fills up to an inch, you turn it off. That's how you know. let them rest. Around here, a lot of our fescue type lawns, which are the ones that are green right now, they don't, it's okay if they go brown in the summer. That's what they do. They're resting. It doesn't mean they're dead. They're just resting. So you can give them a little break in the summer as well. And then, of course, top is to consult with a professional. Seek out people that have organic knowledge, that have done this before. Be a source of wisdom yourself. You're doing that by coming here tonight. Look for some really good resources that are out there. Look through your county agencies. Look for your state agencies and folks like that are providing information. Don't just go to like stewartsblog.com, and trust that Stewart knows what he's doing. But then again, Stewart might be really good at this. But Stewart might have, he knows one way to get there. Dan, on the other hand, he knows a different route to Rome, right? So there's different ways to get there. So doesn't mean that Stewart's wrong or Dan's wrong. They just had different ways of doing it. All right, I'm going to briefly go over some key soil nutrients and how to keep those high for grass using organic amendments, not something from a bag. So the NPK, if you're familiar with that, that's what's typically on a fertilizer bag, is the NPK, and the first one is nitrogen. Plants take up a lot of nitrogen, lawns use a lot of nitrogen. You're gonna get most of the nitrogen for a lawn through those grass clippings. 50 to 100% of the nitrogen that a lawn needs is gonna come from that. Your leaves also provide a lot of nitrogen. So while it's important to keep some leaves for wildlife, rake them into your beds, keep them in compost piles, etc. Any extra leaves, if you chop them up with the lawnmower, they're gonna disappear fast because bacteria is gonna eat them up and gobble it up, but there's a lot of nitrogen in leaves as well. You can also add compost, you can add earthworm castings, which is just earthworm poop, but they also have the bacteria that extract the nitrogen. You can also use seaweed in coffee grounds, particularly coastal areas are great for seaweed, but how many people here are coffee drinkers? All right, so you got free nitrogen right there, just from your coffee grounds. Why put them in the trash if you have a garden or a lawn or something? Let them dry out on your countertop, let them dry out in a pot outside or whatever, and just scatter them, out on your lawn, or put them in your compost pile if you have one. And you can also, go for other sources that are on here. Clover is great, actually. So some people really hate clover because it can get very aggressive. But if you're overseeding, if you have a healthy lawn, if you're mowing high, you won't have a lot of clover. And that actually contains the bacteria that fixes nitrogen from the air. In fact, before World War II, which is about the time we got these fertilizers, clover used to be in lawn seed mixes on purpose. They stopped adding it because then everybody started using pesticides and it was just killing the clover. So clover is really important in lawns. The next on the NPK is the phosphorus, that's the P. Again, tons from just your grass clippings, but also from leaves as well. So within the state law, they only allow 1/2 pound of phosphorus fertilizer for 1,000 square feet, but you get almost 4 times that much just from grass clippings. So I ask people, why are you getting your phosphorus from a bag when you have a free source of it right on the lawn that has 4 times as much as what's allowed by state law? So you can get it through there, and again, like I said, through your leaves, chop some of those up, and they're great. And then the K, the other big 3, is the potassium. And you can encourage that through the use of compost and other things like that. Kelp and seaweed are great for potassium. Potassium's usually not an issue in most people's lawns. It doesn't come up on those soil samples. They're like, ooh, you got a potassium problem. But it is out there. The other is wood ash. You can use wood ash just from, burned wood, fireplace wood. That has a lot of potassium, has a lot of micronutrients. You just have to be careful. It can raise pH if the pH is high in your soil. But microorganisms, as I mentioned, they make the world go round. So we want to increase microorganisms. We want to have healthy, loose soils, and you can get more microorganisms by adding compost in. You can buy what's called EM, which is an effective microorganism. It's just in a bottle, and then you dilute it and put it out. You can purchase endomycorrhizal fungi to add. Those fungi are extracting a lot of nutrients from the soil. So there's a lot of fun things that you can get into, but even just a handful of healthy garden soil or forest soil mixed into your lawn can introduce some of those microorganisms as well. Microorganisms eat a lot of carbon. They need to be fed in order to do what they do for the grass. So again, feeding them grass clippings and leaves, compost, dried seaweed, worm castings, etc. If you or your neighbors have those straw bales in the fall that you use to decorate for Halloween, Thanksgiving, etc., When you're done with those, don't trash them. Just scatter them on the lawn, run the lawnmower over it a couple times to chop it into small bits, and you're giving that great boost of nutrients and carbon right back to the soil. So again, a lot of free things that can be out there. There are going to be some instances where your soil sample is going to be off, like I mentioned there, where you might need some calcium. I like to recommend that people use things that didn't come from a mine. I don't like to see a hole dug in the ground when there's a natural source that we can use. Oyster shells are abundant in our Chesapeake Bay region, and you can buy crushed oyster shell, and you can also use wood ash. These are two great sources of calcium if you end up needing them on your lawn. And then micronutrients are important to lawns. There's a lot of other nutrients out there. You might need micronutrients if your lawn has had some trauma. For example, you did have a big party in the backyard, or there was a bunch of snow that sat there and just sat, and it was saturated and wet and kind of smothered it, and there was all these leaves underneath it, and it was really kind of traumatized, that sort of stress. So you can get micronutrients easily. You can buy sea minerals. They have all the elements on the periodic chart. Their wood ash tea has a lot of things in there, so you're just making a compost tea out of wood ash and spreading that out. Blackstrap molasses is used, especially when people are making a compost tea, and has a lot of nutrients in it. So there's a lot of sources that are out there for micronutrients as well. Any questions on that? Because I'm going to jump in really quickly to alternatives to lawns, but there's plenty of time at the end. Yeah, in the back first.
How about lime? Everybody says, low soil lime.
Yeah, so in my longer, her question is, what about lime? People talk about adding lime to like sweeten the soil, or they put it in the spring. So no. So anything that you're doing to adjust the pH is just causing a temporary seesaw. So in my longer presentation, I talk about the soil science and what's going on underground and how that's working. When you make that sudden burst of calcium from the lime and you're putting it on the soil to knock the hydrogen atoms off the soil, which are extremely tightly held, you're knocking off all these more loosely held nutrients. When you do that, you're knocking off magnesium, you're knocking off phosphorus, you're knocking off all these things, and you're just creating this quick seesaw. You're temporarily changing the pH, but it's not permanent, and in the meantime, you're wreaking havoc just by dumping that on there. So unless your pH is so far off that you can't grow grass, then don't mess with the pH. Be doing all of these other things I talk about. Focus on feeding the soil, focus on aerating the soil, focus on getting a soil sample. Ignore everything they say about pH, because hydrogen is not a nutrient. It affects how nutrients are absorbed, but it's not a nutrient. So we want to be able to buffer the pH, not try to tinker with the pH. So my answer is no. And also most of those come from mined sources. So again, I try to avoid that as much as possible. Yeah.
I'm finding my lawn a lot of, I think it's called a wild strawberry or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of this serrated edge and has a yellow flower. Creepers, it grows very rapidly. What can we do about that?
So his question was about a plant that common name is Indian strawberry or wild strawberry. It's got a little yellow flower. So my answer is the same as almost every other weed, which is you need to grow more grass. If you're struggling growing grass, then again, go back to the soil and look at that. But practice all these cultural methods to get your grass denser. It's hard once a certain weed has really taken over and you have a lot of it, because then you have to spend a lot of effort to try to get that weed as well as its seed source out of the soil. So you might have a little bit of hand pulling followed up by a lot of overseeding to get your grass dense. If your grass is struggling with weeds in general because it's too shady, maybe you have to prune up a couple of limbs on your tree. You know, there could be so many factors for each lawn about why a certain weed is taking over, but weeds are just taking advantage of a space where the grass isn't dense. And there's no easy answer to it because it's just like all the other weeds.
And there's no way to kill it, correct?
There's one organic product, which is there's iron products that are out there that are allowed under our law. They only target broadleaf weeds. I don't know how well it does on Indian strawberry, but it's worth a shot.
Iron products.
Yeah, iron products. Yeah, there's a bunch of them. Every store around there now has. It's a ferric iron product. Go on our website if you want, and I'll have that at the end where you'll be able to see the list and you'll see what's available.
Is that the iron chelate?
Yes, it's an iron chelate, yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a little tricky to apply.
Yeah, so it doesn't kill the grass. It only targets broadleaf plants. It has to be used under certain conditions. Sometimes it needs a repeat use because it's just burning the top of the plant. It's not actually affecting the roots of the plant. So the plant can come back from the roots. So some really aggressive weeds, it needs multiple applications. And you need to let it dry because it's got a blood red color like iron does. And so you have to wait for it to dry before you or your dog runs through the yard because you'll come back with red stains all over. Yeah. Yeah.
I have two more questions. One is about dormancy. When in the summer you were saying to leave the grass dormant. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
You said to leave the grass dormant. So does that mean don't cut it, don't water it?
So her question is about leaving the grass dormant, whether you should cut it, you should water, etc. As long as the grass is growing, you're going to cut it. But if it goes dormant because it's the dry season or the off season, so for example, my boyfriend has a Bermuda grass front yard. In the winter, it looks like straw. I mean, it looks like really nice, thick straw, but it's yellow. That's what it does in the winter. And then in the spring, it all just comes back and it flushes out, and it's all summer, it's green. But the fescue lawns sometimes will do the opposite of that. Not around here so much. We actually have pretty good weather for fescue lawns. But if it goes brown because it's the hot season for a fescue lawn, just let it go brown. You're not going to need to mow it because it's not growing very fast. So there's really not much you need to do.
What type of grass do you recommend? Fescue or what type of grass do you recommend?
So her question is what type of grass seed do you recommend? I'm not really an expert on grass seeds. The state has some really good resources through the University of Maryland Extension, but it also depends on your conditions. How sunny is it? How shady is it? Full sun, you have a lot of options because you can do a fescue lawn, you can do any lawn around here in full sun. Once you start getting into the shade, then you're going to struggle with things like Bermuda grass and some of those other grasses. But some of the extension folks, for example, they're highly encouraging. I mean, I love his Bermuda grass lawn. It has 0 weeds. I mean, it is dense. It looks like straw in the winter, but there's never, like nothing. There's not even a dandelion that pops up into it, and all he does is mow it. He actually doesn't even really need to overseed it. But he's got full sun, so it's great conditions for it. His backyard, which is shady, there's spots of Bermuda grass that have crept in there, but he just would never be able to establish that. So I recommend definitely checking extension first, looking at the conditions, checking with professional, and it depends on what you like, because it depends on when you're willing to tolerate that brownness, of the lawn. A lot of people have a mixture of weeds in their lawn. It's very rare that a lawn around here is just one solid mass of one species, right? So you're gonna have that. Plenty of time at the end for more questions. I'm gonna jump really quickly into alternatives to lawns. I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on this because it's not really my bailiwick. I've got colleagues who have a lot more information on it, but we have a really great Rainscapes program through the county. And the Rainscapes program, how many people are familiar with it or have heard of it? A couple of you. So the Rainscapes program that we have actually comes out of the water quality protection charge that's on your bill. And we actually provide rebates for people to put in rain gardens or conservation landscapes. We also provide rebates for green roofs, pervious pavement, a whole bunch of other things to mitigate stormwater. And those rebates are really great. You don't have to take advantage of them, but they're out there. And what these are great for is you're going to help with the stormwater management on your property by intercepting and managing stormwater. Everyone, if you live in a house, you have stormwater because your roof is generating it. You might not have a driveway or sidewalks or things like that, but you always have an opportunity for perhaps a Rainscapes or conservation landscape on your property if you have any green space out there. We use a lot of native plants to replace lawns, bare grounds, areas infested with non-native invasive species. These are great for that. And you can also create a lot of beauty while creating more resilient landscapes that are, ecologically diverse and actually provide something for wildlife. So there's a lot of benefits to lawn, but as I mentioned, they're not great for wildlife, the birds, the bees, etc. So keep in mind that we have a lot of opportunities here, and there's a lot of reasons why to focus on native plants. They've got more ecosystem benefits, they're good for our pollinators, they don't require watering after establishment, they'll have deeper roots that suck up and infiltrate stormwater and improve the soil. They don't need fertilizers because they're adapted to our soils, and they require little or no pesticides. So there's a lot of benefits to having that. And they shared with me some of these slides, you know, of converting whole lawns to non-lawns. So you can look at these pictures here of beautiful landscapes that people have created right here in Montgomery County, getting rid of their lawns, converting them to native plants, wildlife habitats, things of that nature. I think Stuart will probably address it a little bit. Sometimes people have challenges because their HOAs or even our own county comes out and says, you can't do X, Y, and Z. It's too messy in your front yard. I don't think they use that word, but they're basically implying you have to have grass or you have to have something like that. We work with homeowners, especially if you're converting, to make sure that you can manage that. But there's a lot of ways you can handle that, which is showing what are called cues to care. Having an edge, having a border, having even just a strip of grass this wide that you trim along the edge will show to people that's intentional. They mean for it to be that way. Yeah, it looks a little messy in the winter, but it's on purpose. Having a little fence around it, having a mulched edge or a rock edge or whatever it might be. There's a lot of ways that you can work with these. I mean, they can still be beautiful. To me, I don't find it as messy. But if you're having challenges with, I don't know if my neighbor is going to be okay with that, my community is going to be okay with that, come and talk to us. Maybe we can work out some ideas. Oh, you want to do this? Even if you're not using the Rainscape program, we can give you some tips on how to adjust to that. But there's a lot of ways that you can completely eliminate the lawn from your life. Is it still going to be work? Sure, it is, because everything is work. You've got to weed, you might have to mulch, you've got to clean up the debris, etc. But again, you're going to be benefiting your environment a lot. These are some examples of our conservation landscapes that have gone through our rebate program, where it's not a rain garden, it's not a depressed area that's soaking up water, but these are directing people's downspouts into these areas. Our conservation landscape requires that you direct stormwater into it. But these are some examples, again, in the county of some beautiful landscapes that people have done through our programs. You can also put in rain gardens where you need to mitigate more stormwater. Maybe you have a couple downspouts, maybe a driveway runoff, road runoff, etc. And these are going to be more of your depressed gardens where we do an infiltration test. There's more of a bowl-like environment. Water's going into that, staying in there for 24 to 48 hours and soaking into ground slowly. This is an example of right here in the county. I came across this amazing property. This is the sidewalk is right there. They have one of those steep slopes that goes up to their house, and they've got this native species Pachyra golden ragwort just blanketing this entire slope, and it's an evergreen. So I happened to catch it in bloom, but year round that slope is not bare ground. It always has this coverage of this beautiful Pachyra, and they don't really have to do much to it because the Pachyra just does its thing on the slope, and it's enjoying the shade under a shade tree. So lots of really great things that people can do. We have a lot of successes with people ripping out their lawns. You can see that this person's lawn, it's a shady area. It wasn't really ideal for a lawn to begin with, so they struggled to get that grass to grow. You've got the moss, you've got the Indian strawberry, you've got a lot of weeds, and it was just a struggle to go out and mow this lawn that really wasn't doing anything for them. So here it was just installed, just finished. It will grow in, but you can see they took their entire lawn area and converted it to native plants there. We have a ton of templates on our rainscapes.org page. So if you don't know where to start, you can get these resources, templates that show you some ideas of what you can do. It's already zoned, it's sun, shade, multiple options, etc. So there's a lot of things out there and a lot of lists of native plants, things for sunny gardens, shady gardens, deer-resistant plants, all sorts of things. So that's all on our rainscapes.org, which is just directing you quickly to one of our county pages, but tons of resources there. So even again, if you don't use a Rainscapes rebate, you've got a lot of program options there. This is how our Rainscapes Reward program works. The rain gardens have a minimum size, 75 square feet, which is not, that's like 7 by 10. Doesn't have to be a big area. There's a rebate of up to $10 per square foot for that. And then conservation landscapes have to be a larger area, requirements on how many native plants have to be in there. The minimum size is a little bigger, but still not that big, 25 by 10, not huge. And rebates of $5 to $6 a square foot for installation of those. We also have larger rebates if you are part of a congregation or a nonprofit. There might be some, larger opportunities you can go through Rainscapes. That's great. The other thing, how many people have heard of our Tree Montgomery program, our free trees? Anyone? One person, okay. So we have free shade trees and we plant them for you. And you might get more than one per property. And then, what's that?
We have that program in town. We can plant canopy.
Yeah.
Plant canopy trees for free.
Yes. So plant canopy trees for free, but you can get ours too. Actually, no, maybe Town of Chevy Chase can't. It depends whether you're part of our tree canopy law or not. I'm not sure. But what happens is under a tree canopy law, if anyone from a developer to a homeowner removes trees does not replace them in kind, they have to put money into a fund that we can only use to plant trees. And so even if you can't use them in the county, keep in mind you might have schools, libraries, nonprofits, maybe your kid goes to a daycare somewhere over there, have a neighbor, etc. So treemontgomery.org, you just go there, apply, and they come out, they assess for you. You can work with them to select what species you want. We have tons of species you can choose from, and we plant them and we also replace them if they die. And these are full-size plant trees being planted, so they're like 1.5 to 2 inch caliper trees. They're going to be 10 to 12 feet tall, huge root ball when they're putting them in. So you're not getting a little twig or something like that. You're getting a tree that's going to be pretty well established there. So again, if you can't take advantage of it, please spread the word, because we have a lot of money that goes into this program. Like I said, it can only be used for planting shade trees, so we want to get them out there. And with that, I'm going to wrap it up because I don't want to keep you here all night. This is my email if you want to contact me directly, which is mary.travaglini@montgomerycountymd.gov. And then our website for our lawn pages is montgomerycountymd.gov and just a /lawns. So you can go there. Like I said, you could probably spend a couple days in our lawn care pages if you really want to dive into that. And then rainscapes.org is where you're going to go to get all of your information on native plants, on the rebates, on conservation landscaping, things of that nature. And if anybody has other questions, I'm happy to take them. And I'll definitely stick around while Stuart's talking to see if I can, help with any answers about the right-of-way things as well. Thanks. Thank you. Appreciate it. Great.
Okay, so Mary was talking about lose the lawn. I've got a sort of a variant on that, which is reduce the lawn. And in particular, I've got a particular interest on the right-of-way strips. The town's is a half square mile. And on this half square mile, we have 10 miles of streets. And aside every street, somewhere between 3 and 10 feet, is public right-of-way owned by the town in front of your homes. And this right-of-way strip will typically, if there's a sidewalk there, it typically extends a couple feet beyond the sidewalk. It varies from street to street exactly how wide the right-of-way strip is. And it's everywhere, it's almost all in supposedly grass and town trees, canopy trees oftentimes. It's very often in bad shape, and it adds up to a lot of land in the town. About 10% of the total lawn, about 5% of the total land area of the town is in these right-of-way strips. And there's something that everybody sees from the street. Chevy Chase is known for its canopy trees. It ought to be known for its beautiful vistas, and we try to reduce fences and hedges and things like that for people's views. Well, the right-of-way strip is pretty important also. One quick quote from Etta Marie Mattei, who is a sort of a well-known organic landscaper who's done a lot of work for the town and did a lot of work in particular on the Lawton, the garden, the Lee Dennison garden. Anyway, read what Etta Marie says about in effect, lawns. I think it's a great quote. Would you like a gift of a plant that has these characteristics? The answer is no. So let's move towards making lawns and making these right-of-way strips potentially somewhat better than the lawns that they are. And you will, in fact, manage them like you manage the rest of your property. Yep. Next slide. Sorry. Let's see. How do I go back? Up arrow?
Oh, I can get you back.
I want to go back one slide. Yeah. Okay. So basically, these right-of-way strips are owned by the town, but legally, they can give you a license to use and improve the right-of-way strips. But in so doing, you must maintain them consistent with the town's requirements. Actually, every homeowner is, whether you formally have a license or not, very few people formally do have a license, you are obligated to maintain the right-of-way strip appropriately in front of your house. That's a part of the law. And the requirements are generally pretty straightforward. You can't do anything out there that interferes with vehicle traffic, parking, people getting in and out of cars, things like that. Sight lines in particular, you can't put something very tall up that's going to block the view around a tight corner or something or other like that. You can't create sort of dark blind alleys that pedestrians would fear in the night, that, you know, maybe somebody lurking there. Similarly, you can't interfere with the sidewalks. You can't interfere with free walking along the sidewalks. More specifically, there are specific requirements that the plants that you plant along the right-of-way should be no more than 18 inches in height. In practice, there's a moderate amount of leeway on that, depending upon whether you're locating the plants in an area which really would interfere with sight lines at height higher than that or not. You can't sort of encroach on sidewalks or streets from above, and there are a lot of specific requirements for fences, walls, hedges, berms, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, you should check with the town before you do anything significant with the right-of-way strip. Shoot, up there. Here, a couple of, unfortunately, fairly typical rights-of-way strip. The one on the left is badly eroded and pretty bare and is going to, as soon as it gets some rain, it'll attract weeds. The one on the right is all lesser celandine and invasive. These strips do face any number of challenges: erosion, compaction, foot traffic, etc., runoff from the salt on the sidewalks, etc. They are typically, in ecological terms, a monoculture, which is much less desirable than being a diverse planting. They're typically non-native. There's no support for pollinators, other fauna. Here's some better possibilities. You can take some or part or bits of your right-of-way strip and do something with it. Many people plant specifically around the street trees and create a kind of a bed of something or other around those trees. You can go farther, you can go a longer distance and plant your whole strip if you want. But basically the requirements in doing it are you have to meet the town's requirements. It's ideal to use some natives. It's ideal to have a diversity of plant material there. It's ideal to have something that will support pollinators and maybe nuts for squirrels and things like that. It's ideal to support infiltration. These strips are very useful in catching runoff from impervious surfaces, certainly the sidewalks, but also from other areas that may run across the main part of the lawn into the end of the strip, and you want to have a sort of a non-compacted strip that with plants with deep roots that will take up a lot of that water. Curb appeal is extremely important. Four-season interest, you may look for that. Kind of interestingly, you can match what you do in the strip with the town tree that's there. And there are certain characteristics of trees that support underplanting. Certain types of canopy trees actually have more thin foliage and will let light through to plants underneath, that sort of thing. And you want to aim for low maintenance in general. So that's my pitch on right-of-way strips. So let's have more questions for Mary or for me? or
Anyone have anything additional?
Comments?
I'll be around for a couple minutes while we're packing everything up though, so you can, oh yeah, go ahead.
We only moved in a couple of years ago, and I'm curious what your definition of drought conditions is. 'Cause that's all.
Definition of what?
Drought, when you're saying, let the grass.
Oh, yeah, so the question is what my definition of drought is. That's a great question. So if your weather folks are saying like we're experiencing some drought, et cetera, that's pretty straightforward. But I would say in the really hot summer, if you are 3 to 4 days or more with no rain and the soil, seems dry to you, then, you might need to, especially if you're trying to get things established. One of the great ways to tell whether or not we recommend watering is to go to our tree pages, our Tree Montgomery pages, because we actually set out alerts that say, water your trees because they're under stress right now. So that's also a good time to know, maybe water your lawn, unless your lawn has been subsisting for years with a normal summer, where it gets really dry around here, it dries out, Like I said, if the fescue grass is dormant in the summer and it's brown and it's a well-established lawn, it can handle that stress. There's a lot of stresses that lawns can handle. People have issues with grubs. Well, a really healthy lawn can have 5 to 10 grubs in that 1 square foot, and you would never know it because it's a really healthy lawn. So if you have a healthy lawn, it doesn't mean you have to water just because it got really dry. Mm-hmm.
So I've noticed these signs, Mosquito Joe,
Uh-huh.
been here. Are they covered under the exemption for pesticides and biting insects?
Yes, biting and stinging insects include mosquito treatments. So while I have a lot of blogs on why not to do those mosquito treatments, they are exempt. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Speaking of drought, there's also the reverse problem, which is we're just getting more volatility in weather.
Yep.
So we're also getting, there are trees that are having problems with too much water,
Yes.
and the water drowning the roots and creating damage. What would you say about lawns versus those alternatives that you showed when it comes to being able to handle the variability?
The volatility. So our native plants, grass handles volatility really well, which is why it becomes a lot of surfaces. But in terms of alternatives, going towards those native plants is going to make a big difference, because the native plants can actually, especially adapted to our area, even though our extremes are getting bigger, they're still at least adapted to the environment already. And if they have deeper roots, those deeper roots are helping them out with getting that water from the deep or the nutrients from the deep or being able to handle that drought. But yeah, I'd say all the plants, like you said, from trees to lawns to gardens, they're all experiencing that. And I don't know if there's any standard advice yet on, hey, if it's getting more volatile, go towards these plants, not these. But maybe there's more coming out. Yeah.
I have a question, so it's for both of you, Mary and Stuart, about these strips in the town rights of way. So it seems like, and they're a mess in most places around town. What's a good way to go about that? So maybe tackling, doing some of the, among the 10 tips that you mentioned at first, because maybe they need to be aerated, maybe they need to be weeded or seeded or whatever. But it just seems like you know, that's a project that many of us could be busy with
Oh, yeah.
for quite a
The
while.
soils are terrible
Yeah.
in the right-of-way strips.
And, you know, I was especially concerned with erosion, you know, because in some streets where the right-of-way slopes,
Mm-hmm.
you know, in the town, you know, we keep planting sod.
Right.
in those, and then they just wash away, or they die. I mean, the town needs to stop doing that. But just in general, for those of us who are trying to maintain our rights of way.
Well, yeah, I suspect, number one, take one of those soil samples. Like I said, $8 to $15 doesn't cost much. You'll find out pretty quickly what's really bad in those soils, and typically a lot of it is they're just really devoid of organic matter, because it was the worst soil that was left over from digging the pit for people's basements in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, etc., and then dumped there, and then they've been driven over by trash trucks, they've been walked on, they've got salt, they have snow, you pile your leaves on them. I mean, they're abused, right? So they're usually going to be pretty dead and devoid. So using compost tea, getting organic material in there, it can sometimes be a bit of work. So start small, you know, because we don't all have the time and the money to do this, but starting small. And I agree, sod is not really a great way to go. Sod is very expensive and highly stressed when it's installed, and then it's never cared for properly. So it was just dug up from being babied in a full sun field, right? With chemicals, fertilizers, full sun, ideal conditions, and then they went and they cut all the roots, and then you put it down on pretty dead soil, and then it's not cared for. So if it's going to be grass, trying to go towards establishing new from seed. And what sometimes lawn care companies will do when they're establishing from scratch, especially if it's a lawn, is they'll smother the soil to kill all the weed seeds. So they're putting down plastic, cardboard, etc., solarizing that, getting rid of all those weed seeds, and kind of starting from scratch. But a lot of times it's just the soil is terrible. It's work. But it can be done. I mean, I grew up going to New York City, and within the tree pits and stuff, there can be beautiful plantings just maintained by, you know, the superintendent of the apartment building or whatever. So if it can be done there, it can be done here. It just takes a little bit of time. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If you have a spot like that where you're talking about where you know, get rid of the weeds and the seeds and all, can you just start doing the amendments like we talked about, or do you actually need to bring in soil as well?
Yeah, so the question is, can you just go with some of the amendments and the tips or start from scratch? It depends where you're at and what your goal is of how quickly you want to get there. The smothering is often done when it's just so far gone with so many weed seeds that they really just need to kind of kill all the weed seeds, get rid of all of that, and then you're starting from scratch. But every situation is going to be a little different. Yeah. Did you have a question over here?
So I compost leaves, and I started putting urea in that. Is that
Putting what in?
urea, which is nitrogen, right?
Yeah.
You know, you can pick it up at Stroh Centers in the wintertime to put on ice, and it's cheap. Does that work?
On ice or?
No, for, you know, gardens and.
Oh, so his question is, you know, getting urea to put down as a nitrogen source. I would say you're better off with just using regular old, you know, your leaves, your compost, grass clippings, things of that nature. The urea, so what I don't like doing is giving plants a sudden jolt of a bagged thing, because you get this sort of seesaw going on. And a lot of folks think that they need to give a lot of nitrogen boosts to their lawn because they need a lot of lawns need a lot of nitrogen, but that's again leaving the grass clippings, mowing over some of your leaves and leaving them in there. You're gonna get plenty of nitrogen back into your lawns or your gardens. So I would focus on some other things instead, but yeah.
Doesn't the state law specifically prohibit?
There are some prohibitions of nitrogen, applications of nitrogen in the winter as well. But most grass isn't growing in the winter either, so shouldn't need the nitrogen in the winter. But if it's allowed for the salt, then that's okay. But I wouldn't need it for the natural environment. Awesome. All right, I'm going to let you all go. Just come up and ask questions. I'll have my mask on if folks need to ask things, but I really appreciate you coming. Thank you all. Really appreciate it.